The rain had stopped just before the funeral guests drifted away, leaving behind damp stone paths and a silence that seemed to settle over every corner of the estate. Eleanor Blackwood remained in the garden long after the final car disappeared through the gates. Crushed flower petals covered the walkway, and abandoned coffee cups sat on folding tables no one had bothered to clear. 43 years of marriage had ended with polite handshakes, rehearsed condolences, and people eager to return to their own lives. No one asked if she needed company. No one even asked how she planned to get home. Her husband, Harrison Blackwood, had always joked that funerals should be loud. People should laugh through their tears, tell embarrassing stories, and remember the life instead of admiring expensive flower arrangements. Yet his farewell felt cold and perfectly organized, as though every emotion had been scheduled weeks in advance. Sabrina Cross had arranged every detail: the flowers, the music, the slideshow, even the order in which guests entered the reception hall. Everything looked flawless. Everything felt wrong. When Eleanor stepped inside the house they had built together decades earlier, Sabrina was already collecting paperwork from the dining table. She stacked folders with practiced precision without once meeting Eleanor's eyes. "We'll begin the estate procedures next week," Sabrina said calmly. Everything has already been prepared. There was no invitation to discuss it. No question about Eleanor's wishes. No acknowledgement that she had spent the previous 7 months sleeping in uncomfortable hospital chairs, feeding Harrison, helping him dress, and refusing to leave his bedside while illness slowly stole his strength. Instead, Sabrina reached into a leather briefcase and handed Eleanor a small velvet box. "Harrison wanted you to have this." Inside rested a silver tie clip. Nothing else. No handwritten letter. No final message. No explanation. Eleanor stared at it in disbelief. Her husband had filled dozens of journals over the years. He wrote birthday notes, anniversary letters, and little reminders that he slipped beneath her coffee cup every Sunday morning. Yet somehow, after more than 4 decades together, all that remained for her was an old tie clip he rarely even wore. Sabrina offered a polite smile before leaving the room. The sound of her heels echoed down the hallway. For the first time since Harrison's death, Eleanor felt like a visitor inside her own home. That evening, she wandered through the quiet rooms, touching familiar furniture as though reassuring herself it still belonged to her. Harrison's reading glasses rested beside his favorite chair. His unfinished novel remained open on the coffee table. His jacket still hung near the front door where he had left it before his final hospital visit. Everything carried his presence, yet somehow she felt erased from it all. Sleep never came. Instead, she sat alone in the kitchen watching darkness cover the windows while questions circled endlessly through her mind. 3 days later, an email arrived. Not from Sabrina, from Sabrina's executive assistant. The message contained only a meeting time, an address for the law office, and the subject line, Estate Administration Meeting. Nothing more, no sympathy, no kindness, just instructions. On Wednesday morning, Eleanor entered the downtown office 5 minutes late after sitting in her parked car wondering whether she should simply drive away. The reception area gleamed with polished marble and spotless glass walls. A young assistant escorted her into a conference room where 7 professionals waited around an enormous oak table. Sabrina occupied the seat at the head. She didn't stand, she didn't smile. She simply nodded toward the only empty chair positioned at the far end of the room. As the meeting began, documents were distributed to everyone except Eleanor. Sabrina spoke with the confidence of a corporate executive presenting quarterly results. She listed investment accounts, commercial buildings, retirement funds, company shares, vacation properties. Then she announced that Harrison had transferred primary authority over the family trust months before his death. Eleanor's heartbeat quickened. That couldn't be true. She had managed every financial decision beside Harrison for nearly 20 years. He never mentioned surrendering that responsibility. The presentation continued, name after name, asset after asset, until finally one of the attorneys interrupted. "And Mrs. Blackwood's inheritance?" The room became quiet. Sabrina barely looked up from her notes. There are no remaining distributions assigned to Eleanor Blackwood under the finalized estate documents. The sentence struck harder than any physical blow. 43 years, Thousands of shared mornings, every hospital visit, every sacrifice, reduced to a single sentence. No remaining distributions, no explanation followed. No one questioned it. The meeting simply continued as though Eleanor had never existed. She remained perfectly still until it ended. One by one, the others left the conference room. Sabrina quietly packed her briefcase, almost expecting Eleanor to protest. She didn't. Without saying a word, Eleanor stood, adjusted her coat, and walked out of the building. The cold afternoon air hit her face as she reached the sidewalk. She still didn't cry. Not because she wasn't heartbroken, because something deeper had taken its place. Instinct. Harrison had trusted her with every important decision throughout their marriage. He would never erase her without explanation. Something wasn't right. Someone had rewritten the ending of their story. And before Eleanor Blackwood surrendered everything they had built together, she intended to discover exactly who had written those final pages. Eleanor drove home without remembering a single traffic light she had passed. Her hand stayed firmly on the steering wheel, but her thoughts remained trapped inside the conference room. There were no remaining distributions assigned to Eleanor Blackwood. The sentence echoed louder with every mile. When she pulled into the driveway, the house looked exactly as it always had. Harrison's maple trees swayed gently in the afternoon breeze, and the porch light she always forgot to switch off still glowed against the fading daylight. Everything looked familiar. Nothing felt the same. Inside, silence greeted her like an unwelcome guest. She removed her coat, hung it carefully beside Harrison's old jacket, and walked toward his study. The room still smelled faintly of cedar wood and the coffee he had always brewed while balancing business reports across his desk. For several minutes, she simply stood there. Then, almost without thinking, she opened the top drawer. Inside lay pens, receipts, old reading glasses, and a worn leather notebook. Beneath those items rested a plain brown folder she had never noticed before. There was no label, no date, just a faded elastic band holding it closed. A strange feeling settled over her as she opened it. The first page was handwritten. She recognized Harrison's handwriting instantly despite its shaky appearance. The note wasn't addressed to anyone. It simply read, "Sabrina keeps insisting the estate documents need updating because our investments have changed. She says everything must be simplified before my treatments become more difficult. I haven't signed the final papers yet. Something doesn't feel right, but I don't have the strength to argue anymore. I haven't told Eleanor because I don't want to worry about her until I'm certain." Eleanor stopped breathing. She read the words again and again. Every sentence felt heavier than the last. Harrison had doubts. He hadn't trusted what was happening, yet he had kept those fears to himself. With trembling fingers, she lifted the second document. It was an earlier draft of his will. Her name appeared several times throughout the pages. The family home, savings accounts, investment shares, personal collections, everything had originally been left to her, but thick red lines crossed through entire paragraphs. In the margin, someone had written, "Discuss revisions with SC Sabrina Cross." Eleanor's stomach tightened. The final document from the lawyer's office looked nothing like this version. Someone had changed everything. The third page contained appointment records. Several legal meetings had taken place during Harrison's cancer treatments. Meetings Eleanor knew nothing about. She had rarely left his side. The only times she was present were the afternoons Sabrina insisted on taking Harrison to private financial consultations. At the time, Eleanor believed she was helping. Now every memory feels different. She carefully placed the papers back inside the folder and sat in Harrison's chair. The room suddenly seemed colder. Late that evening, she remembered one conversation from nearly a year earlier. They had been eating dinner on the back patio. Harrison had reached across the table and squeezed her hand. "You'll never have to worry," he had said with a tired smile. "I've made sure you're protected." She had believed him. Now she wondered whether he had believed it himself. Sleep never arrived that night. Instead, Eleanor read every page inside the folder until dawn painted pale light across the study windows. By sunrise, she had reached one conclusion. This wasn't a simple misunderstanding. Someone had deliberately altered Harrison's final wishes. The next morning, she made one phone call. "Graham Foster speaking." His calm voice carried the same quiet confidence she remembered. Graham had been Harrison's closest friend for more than 30 years. Before retirement, he had built a respected legal career, specializing in corporate ethics and estate planning. If anyone could help uncover the truth, it was him. "Eleanor?" Graham asked after a brief pause. "It's been too long. I need your help." He heard something in her voice that required no further explanation. "When can you meet?" "Today." An hour later, they sat inside a small cafe tucked away from the busy downtown streets. Rain tapped softly against the windows while Eleanor slid the brown folder across the table. Graham read every page without interruption. His expression gradually changed from curiosity to concern. When he finished, he placed both hands flat on the table. "This isn't normal." Eleanor waited silently. He continued. "If these drafts are genuine, and I believe they are, someone made significant changes after Harrison questioned the revisions. You think Sabrina did this?" "I think we don't accuse anyone until we have proof." He pulled out a notebook and began making careful notes. Dates, names, law firms, witnesses, appointment records. Then he circled one detail. "Do you recognize either witness who signed the final will?" Eleanor shook her head. "No." "That's unusual." Harrison always asked close friends or trusted neighbors to witness legal documents, Graham explained. He disliked involving strangers in family matters. He leaned back thoughtfully. "I want certified copies of every version of the estate documents. I also want to identify these witnesses and verify exactly when the signatures were recorded." "Can we do that?" "Yes, but quietly." Eleanor nodded. She wasn't interested in revenge. She wanted answers. Before leaving the cafe, Graham looked directly at her. "Until we know everything, tell no one about these papers." "I won't. And keep the originals somewhere safe." Driving home, Eleanor purchased a small fireproof lockbox from a hardware store. She placed Harrison's folder inside and hid it beneath old family photo albums in the upstairs closet. As she closed the lid, determination replaced despair. Sabrina Cross believed the story had already ended. She believed Eleanor would quietly accept being erased from Harrison's life. She was wrong, because hidden inside one forgotten folder was the first crack in a carefully constructed lie, and Eleanor intended to follow that crack until the entire truth finally came into the light. The following week passed slowly. Eleanor forced herself to maintain her routine, even though every ordinary task now carried an unusual weight. She watered the flowers Harrison had planted years earlier, attended her weekly book club without contributing much to the discussion, and prepared meals she barely touched. Outwardly, nothing had changed. Inside, everything had. Every evening, she checked the hallway closet where the locked box remained hidden. Knowing Harrison's handwritten note was still there gave her an unexpected sense of strength. 3 days after their meeting, Graham called. "I've confirmed something," he said. His voice was calm, but Eleanor immediately recognized the seriousness beneath it. "What did you find?" "The certified estate records arrived this morning. And there are discrepancies." An hour later, she met him in his office. Stacks of documents covered the conference table. Graham handed her 2 copies of Harrison's will. "They appear identical at first glance," he explained. "They're not?" He pointed toward the witness section. "The signatures belong to 2 individuals who have no previous connection to Harrison." Eleanor frowned. "He never would have chosen strangers." "I know." Graham slid another folder across the table. "I investigated both witnesses. Neither lived anywhere near Harrison's neighborhood. Neither had ever attended family events. One worked as a contract notary who frequently handled legal paperwork for Sabrina's law firm. The other had signed dozens of estate documents during the previous year. "They're professional witnesses," Graham said quietly. "Is that illegal?" "No. But considering Harrison's habits, it's extremely unusual." Eleanor studied the pages carefully. For more than 40 years, Harrison had trusted familiar faces with important decisions. Neighbors, old friends, business partners, people whose integrity he knew personally. Using complete strangers made no sense. "There must be more," she whispered. "There is." Graham opened another file. "I found someone Harrison met shortly before his final hospital stay." He placed a business card on the table. Leon Mercer, independent financial consultant. Harrison scheduled 2 private meetings with him. I never knew. I don't believe you were meant to. Can we speak to him? I already arranged it. The appointment was scheduled for the following afternoon. Leon Mercer welcomed them into a modest office overlooking a quiet park. He appeared to be in his early 60s, dressed simply, with kind eyes that immediately softened when Eleanor introduced herself. I'm sorry for your loss, he said sincerely. Harrison spoke about you often. Eleanor looked surprised. He did? Every meeting. Leon retrieved a thin client folder from a cabinet. I normally keep discussions confidential. He paused. But considering the circumstances, and with Graham present, I believe Harrison would want you to hear this. He opened the folder. Harrison came to me because he wanted an independent review of his estate. Eleanor exchanged a glance with Graham. He said someone was encouraging him to make major changes while he was undergoing treatment. Did he mention Sabrina? Leon nodded. He never accused her of anything directly, but he admitted he felt pressured. What happened? He wanted time. Leon leaned forward. He asked me whether he should postpone signing new documents until after his medical treatments. And what did you tell him? I advised him to wait. Eleanor's pulse quickened. Did he? Leon slowly shook his head. No. A week later, I received a phone call canceling every remaining appointment. Who called? A woman. He reached into the folder and removed handwritten intake notes. I recorded her name. He turned the page toward them. Caller, Sabrina Cross. Message, client no longer requires independent estate review. The room fell silent. Eleanor felt as though the walls were closing around her. So Harrison never canceled personally? No. He never contacted me again. Leon handed Graham photocopies of every appointment record. I also kept Harrison's original questionnaire. Eleanor carefully read one sentence written in Harrison's unmistakable handwriting. My priority is ensuring Eleanor is protected after I'm gone. Her eyes filled with tears. For days she had wondered whether Harrison had abandoned her. Now she finally understood. He had been trying to protect her until the very end. He simply ran out of time. Outside the office, Eleanor stood beneath a gray autumn sky while traffic rolled steadily through the city. I should have known, she whispered. No, Graham replied firmly. You trusted your family. That's never a mistake. They drove back in silence. Later that evening, Graham called once more. I have another lead. What is it? I located one of Sabrina's former legal assistants. Does she know anything? I don't know yet. Her name is Naomi Carter. He paused. She left the firm unexpectedly a few months after Harrison died. Will she speak to us? I've already reached out. And? She agreed to meet. When? Tomorrow morning. Eleanor looked out the living room window toward the maple trees Harrison had planted decades earlier. For the first time since the reading of the will, she no longer felt helpless. The hidden folder had uncovered unanswered questions. Leon Mercer had confirmed Harrison's growing doubts. Now, another witness was preparing to speak. If Naomi Carter revealed what Graham suspected, Sabrina's carefully constructed version of events would begin to collapse. And Eleanor had a feeling that the truth waiting ahead would be far bigger than anyone had imagined. The next morning, Eleanor arrived at Graham Foster's office before sunrise. Thick gray clouds hung over the city, and a steady drizzle blurred the windows. She barely noticed the weather. Her thoughts were fixed on one question. What did Naomi Carter know? At precisely 9 o'clock, the conference room door opened. A woman in her mid-30s stepped inside wearing a navy cardigan and carrying a worn leather folder against her chest. She looked nervous, but there was determination in her eyes. "Mrs. Blackwood?" she asked softly. Eleanor stood and offered a gentle smile. "Thank you for coming." Naomi nodded before taking a seat across from Eleanor and Graham. "I've wanted to speak for months," she admitted. "I just didn't know who would believe me." Graham switched on a small digital recorder. "This conversation is voluntary," he said. "You may stop at any time." "I understand." She took a deep breath before opening her folder. "I worked for Sabrina Cross for nearly 5 years." "What changed?" Eleanor asked. "Harrison's estate." The room fell silent. Naomi carefully removed several pages from the folder. About 6 weeks before Harrison passed away, Sabrina ordered our team to revise several estate documents. "Was Harrison present?" Graham asked. "Not during most of the revisions." Naomi's answer immediately caught Eleanor's attention. "What do you mean?" "We prepared multiple versions before Mr. Blackwood never entered the office." She placed copies of internal scheduling notes on the table. Sabrina wanted everything completed before his condition worsened. Eleanor's heart began to race. Naomi continued, "One Sunday evening, I returned to the office because I'd forgotten my laptop. She paused, remembering every detail. The conference room lights were still on. I looked her through the glass. "What did you see?" Graham asked quietly. Sabrina and another employee were reviewing unsigned estate papers. "Were they alone?" "Yes." "Was Harrison there?" Naomi slowly shook her head. "No." She reached into her folder again and produced a small daily planner. "I wrote down everything that bothered me." She opened it to a marked page. 7:42 p.m. Asked to witness an estate signature. Client not present. Sabrina said paperwork was already approved. Eleanor stared at the handwritten note. "You witnessed a signature without seeing the Harrison sign?" "I refused." Naomi lowered her eyes. Sabrina wasn't happy. "What happened then?" "She told another employee to finish the paperwork." Graham leaned forward. "Do you remember that employee's name?" Naomi nodded. "I do." She quietly spoke the name while Graham wrote it in his notebook. "Did anyone question what happened?" Eleanor asked. "No." Everyone was afraid. Sabrina controlled promotions, salaries, and recommendations. Nobody wanted to risk their careers. Naomi reached for another document. "This is an email I printed before leaving the firm." Graham read it silently. His expression hardened. "What is it?" Eleanor asked. He turned the page toward her. The subject line read, "Urgent Estate Revision Timeline." Below it, one sentence stood out. "Finalize revised beneficiary structure before additional medical complications delay execution." There was no misunderstanding, no innocent explanation. Someone had been racing against Harrison's declining health. Naomi spoke again. There was something else. Eleanor looked at her. "A few days before Harrison entered the hospital for the last time, I overheard Sabrina making a phone call." "What did she say?" "I only caught part of the conversation." "What part?" Naomi swallowed hard. "I clearly remember one sentence." She looked directly at Eleanor. "Once everything is signed, no one will be able to challenge the transition." The words settled over the room like heavy stone. Eleanor closed her eyes. She wasn't angry anymore. She felt something far stronger. Certainty. Graham organized the documents into separate folders. "These records establish a pattern," he said. "Internal revisions. Pressure. Questionable procedures. And now an eyewitness." Naomi nodded. "I kept copies because something never felt right. I'm sorry I stayed silent for so long." Eleanor reached across the table and gently squeezed her hand. "You spoke when it mattered." Tears filled Naomi's eyes. "I respected Harrison. He treated everyone with kindness. I couldn't let his final wishes disappear." After Naomi signed a formal witness statement, Graham walked her to the lobby. When he returned, he carried another envelope. "I received this early this morning." "From whom?" Eleanor asked. "The probate court." He opened it carefully. "The judge has approved our request for a preliminary hearing." Eleanor looked at him. "When?" "In less than 2 weeks." The courtroom would finally become the place where every document, witness statement, timeline, and unanswered question would be examined under oath. For months, Sabrina had controlled the narrative. She had controlled the paperwork. She had controlled the people around her. But inside a courtroom, influence meant nothing without evidence. And for the first time, Eleanor and Graham possessed something far more powerful than suspicion. They had proof. As Eleanor left the office that afternoon, she stopped outside the courthouse across the street. The stone steps rose toward massive wooden doors polished by decades of use. Soon she would walk through them, not as a grieving widow begging for sympathy, but as a woman determined to defend the truth her husband had tried so desperately to protect. She took one final look at the courthouse before returning to her car. The battle was no longer about money. It was about Harrison's voice, and in just a few days, that voice would finally be heard again. The morning of the hearing arrived beneath a sky heavy with rain clouds. Eleanor Blackwood stood outside the courthouse, gripping the strap of her handbag as she looked toward the stone steps leading to the entrance. Months earlier, she would have walked through those doors feeling defeated. Today was different. She wasn't there to fight for wealth. She was there to defend the truth. Inside, Graham Foster was already waiting beside their attorney, Victoria Hayes. Both greeted Eleanor with reassuring smiles before leading her into the courtroom. Across the aisle sat Sabrina Cross. She looked as polished and composed as ever, dressed in a tailored charcoal suit with a leather portfolio resting neatly on the table before her. She barely acknowledged Eleanor's presence. The judge entered. Everyone stood. After the formal introductions, Victoria rose first. Your Honor, this case is not merely about inheritance. It concerns whether the deceased's final wishes were altered through undue influence and questionable legal procedures. She presented Harrison's handwritten notes, the earlier draft of the will, appointment records from Leon Mercer, Naomi Carter's sworn statement, email records, witness timelines. Every document was carefully organized, every date matched. Sabrina's attorney argued that Harrison had voluntarily revised his estate plans while receiving medical treatment. Victoria calmly responded, "If that is true, the evidence should support it." The judge nodded. "Proceed." Naomi Carter was called first. She described the late-night office meeting, the unsigned documents, and Sabrina's request to witness paperwork without Harrison present. She remained calm throughout cross-examination. Her testimony never changed. Next came Leon Mercer. He confirmed that Harrison had sought independent advice because he felt pressured to make changes before he was ready. He explained how Sabrina had canceled every future consultation on Harrison's behalf. Then Graham presented certified records proving that the final witnesses had no personal relationship with Harrison, despite his long-established practice of using trusted friends. The courtroom became noticeably quieter. Finally, Victoria approached the evidence table carrying one last document, Harrison Blackwood's handwritten journal. She carefully handed copies to the judge. One paragraph immediately drew everyone's attention. "If anything ever happens to me, Eleanor must never lose the home we built together. She stood beside me through every success and every hardship. Protecting her will always be my greatest responsibility." Silence filled the courtroom. Eleanor lowered her eyes. Those words sounded exactly like the man she had loved for 43 years. Not the version presented in the revised estate documents, the real Harrison. Sabrina's attorney attempted one final argument. Personal journals are emotional writings, not binding legal instructions. Victoria nodded. "That is correct." She stepped toward the judge. "But when those writings perfectly match earlier estate drafts, independent financial consultations, witness testimony, appointment records, and internal communications, they establish something much greater." She paused. "They establish intent." The judge spent several minutes reviewing the evidence before speaking. "The court finds sufficient evidence of irregularities surrounding the revised estate documents." Everyone remained silent. "The contested will is hereby suspended pending full probate review." Sabrina's expression finally changed. For the first time since Harrison's funeral, her confidence disappeared. The judge continued. "Authority over the estate is immediately frozen. An independent administrator will oversee all assets until the investigation concludes." Victoria smiled quietly. Graham gently placed a reassuring hand on Eleanor's shoulder. Weeks later, after the forensic investigation and additional testimony were completed, the final ruling was issued. The court determined that significant revisions to Harrison's estate had been made under improper circumstances. The disputed documents were declared invalid. Harrison's earlier will, the one naming Eleanor as primary beneficiary and lifelong trustee, was officially restored. Sabrina resigned from every position connected to Harrison's charitable foundation before any additional disciplinary proceedings could begin. She left without offering an apology. Eleanor never expected one. Several months later, she returned to the foundation for the first time. The new board welcomed her warmly. They invited her to review Harrison's original scholarship program and help preserve the mission he had spent decades building. She accepted, not because she wanted power, but because she wanted his legacy remembered honestly. That afternoon, she visited Harrison's grave carrying fresh white lilies. She knelt quietly before the headstone. "I kept my promise," she whispered. "The truth found its way home." A gentle breeze moved through the maple trees surrounding the cemetery, the same kind Harrison had planted outside their home many years earlier. For the first time since losing him, Eleanor felt no anger, no bitterness, only peace. She finally understood that real love was never measured by money, titles, or legal documents. It was measured by loyalty, by courage, by refusing to let someone rewrite a lifetime of devotion. As she walked back toward her car, the afternoon sun broke through the clouds for the first time in weeks. Its warm light stretched across the path ahead of her. The future no longer felt uncertain. Harrison's name had been cleared. His true wishes had been honored. And Eleanor Blackwood stepped forward carrying something far more valuable than an inheritance. She carried the truth. No one would ever erase her from their story again.